Today on Pantera TV, we're discussing the topic of decentralization of networks. And a decentralized network is one where no one single entity exhibits undue influence, control, or authority over the functioning of that network, such that an attack on a single entity could result in that network ceasing to function as it did prior to the attack. Now, there's a metric referred to as the Nakamoto coefficient, which refers to the number of independent entities which would need to collude to control more than 50% of the hash rate or critical subsystems of that network. And so we're going to examine some of those subsystems momentarily. The first critical subsystem is that of protocol governance. So basically, who decides the rules of the network, how many developers are involved, how many have commit access, and the ability of, say, miners or users of the network to reject changes implemented by those who have commit access if they're not in agreement with the rules that are made by those with that commit access. The next critical component is that of node decentralization. So basically, how many parties independently are validating transactions on the network. This comes down to decentralization by geography, by ownership, by hosting provider, by jurisdiction, because again, you don't want all your nodes in the same geography, by the same owner or using the same hosting provider. Okay, the next critical subsystem is that of mining, or the concentration of who's producing blocks on the network. And this comes down to again, could be concentration of mining pools, the geographic concentration, or even the number of say producers of manufacturing equipment. In this case, say ASIC manufacturers that are actually producing the equipment which is used to mine blocks on the network. Another critical subsystem is that of wallets. Basically, you want it to be easy to self-custody your tokens. You want to have a lot of wallet app options, and this can be anywhere from mobile apps to desktop apps to hardware wallets. And then ideally, you wouldn't be overly dependent on, say, just like the Google Play Store or the Apple Store, which still are kind of centralized listings of apps, because theoretically that does create a point of attack if some governing authority were to issue an order to those two companies to discontinue crypto apps. Then it creates a little more of a challenge on trying to self-custody, or at least update apps if they're no longer available in those Play stores or Apple stores. Another critical component is that of exchanges or exchange decentralization. How many exchanges allow you to buy and sell that token, or what is the geographic distribution of exchanges? You don't want to be able to just have one exchange that's available to buy or sell, Bitcoin and so forth. You want to have multiple options so that, again, you eliminate that single point of failure. Another critical subsystem is that of ownership decentralization, because holders of large balances of tokens on a network can actually influence development or funding of development on that network. So you want to look at wallet balances. You want to look at active addresses and the balances of those addresses, just in general, kind of concentration of wealth among a small number of influential holders, which could include exchanges, and that just creates a potential risk if ownership is too concentrated among a small number of large holders. Another critical subsystem is that of social influence. So basically, how many websites or podcasts or YouTube channels or conferences which have a significant following and significant influence on the users or developers in a space, and their ability to kind of influence opinion, influence usage, influence protocol changes or so forth. And so that, again, that is still a subsystem that needs to be considered, because certainly there are certain YouTube channels that have a more significant following and that would have more influence on the network. Another critical system is that of infrastructure decentralization, and it should be, relatively easy for third parties to be able to build apps on top of that protocol without needing permission from a foundation or some sort of governmental entity to do so. And also, you can still have a difference between, decentralization of the protocol versus decentralization of some sort of a DeFi app, where you still could have a single server that it could go down and affect the functioning of that app, or even a developer who can kind of do a rug pull on the users of that app. So protocol versus app-specific decentralization. Another critical area is that of merchant decentralization. So basically, having a token being able to be used as a medium of exchange. How many retailers accept that payment method, how many payment processors allow you to use that token, the geographic diversity of being able to use that token, not just in one city, but being able to go to multiple neighborhoods and cities, and still being able to transact in that token. So when we talk about decentralization risk, in the case of Bitcoin, you could say the mining pool hash rate would be one area, kind of ballpark 75% of the hash rate is among a small number of mining pools. Now theoretically, an individual miner can move its hash from one pool to another pool to kind of reduce the effect of mining pool concentration. But theoretically, there are a small number of mining pools that kind of dominate the Bitcoin network. And then also you have Bitcoin Core. The node software is applicable to about 85% of Bitcoin nodes. Now theoretically, you only have just a small number of maintainers, that they do need to get kind of broad consensus from the community. But again, most of the Bitcoin nodes are utilizing Bitcoin Core software, so it certainly is a great deal of influence there. And then lastly, the ASIC manufacturing equipment, ballpark 95% of ASIC manufacturing equipment is coming from a small number of ASIC manufacturers. And even though there are economic incentives in place for them to continue to produce efficient, reputable equipment, theoretically it could be a point of attack. Now in the case of Bitcoin Cash, there is a chip process that kind of gets a kind of a broad consensus as far as changes to the network, but you do have again a smaller number of developers working on Bitcoin Cash than you do on Bitcoin. You also have a much lower hash rate, so just one Bitcoin mining pool could divert its hash. A large Bitcoin mining pool could divert its hash theoretically to attack the network. And then as far as social influence, you have you have much larger following, I guess more distribution of social influence on Bitcoin BTC than you have with Bitcoin Cash. It's pretty much the Bitcoin Cash podcast is kind of the dominant YouTube channel in the Bitcoin Cash space. So that just kind of touches on the areas of decentralization risk for Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash. So as I was researching the topic of decentralization, I quickly came to the realization it's a lot more involved than I initially thought. But it is an important point to understand, because in contrast to kind of VC founded type tokens, where the founders of a token can make the rules, have a large treasury, which maybe makes the founders and the VC funds wealthy, but maybe kind of disregards the users or of the tokens. In the case of Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash, vast majority of the tokens have already been issued, already in the hands of users, and we you don't have a single entity kind of dictating what's going to happen with the future of that network. So hopefully you found this useful, and till next video.